and welcome back to our sixth part of our Mastering Our Relationship, our last workshop in regard to how we can gain or harness the art of relating with others. So we talked a little bit about this at the beginning, and today I want to do a bit of a summary first. What relationships actually are, and we found out that it's not just our romantic relationships. Obviously, we have most of the issues with our romantic relationships, and I think number two is probably our family relationships. Is that how you guys experience that in your life? That the closer a person is, the more complex and the more difficult the navigating of a relationship becomes, right? So obviously we have relationships with our co-workers, we have relationships with our friends, social friends, acquaintances, strangers, people that we do courses together, or even animals and plants and the world at large. So we have relationships with all these different types of living beings, if you will. And it's very important to understand the fundamental need that is behind us stepping into relationship with the world around us and the people that are in this world. Here, just a little sort of consciousness thought for you or contemplation for you. What would the world be like for us if we had no relationships? Anybody an opinion about this, or an immediate spontaneous thought? What would life be without relationships? Let's say you could survive on your own, which we as humans can't. We are designed to collaborate. We're designed to work together in order to survive. That's part of our species pre-programming. But let's say you could survive on your own. How would life be? Anybody? Is this maybe like an attractive thought for you? Not having to, step into a relationship with anybody and just going about your own stuff.
Yeah, briefly, I feel like I've been there a bit. So there's some really good things with that.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, the first thing that came to mind when you said with no relationships, it came to me, robotic is what came to me. If we didn't have relationships, I think the ideal way of a relationship is we can see that there's lots of different ways of relating. But like a heartfelt relationship is very nurturing and growing. So
yeah,
yeah,
we learn a lot from another, don't we?
yes.
I mean, as a matter of fact, that's part of the pre-programming that we have. Yeah, because we actually come to this world with just a small set of instincts, but most of our behavior, that allows us to survive is actually learned behavior, sociology.
Well, too, wouldn't it, like, relating with one another increase not just, I just can only say intelligence, like this relating expands us in intellectual ways, not heavy mind ways, but just into intelligence of our emotions and the depth of all of that, where somebody, like when you said, oh, you come here with primitive skills, that if we didn't relate, maybe it would still just be very primitive, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we wouldn't be able to read or write. We wouldn't be able to communicate here right now. We wouldn't develop language. So there are some very fundamental things about us that are developed, that are inspired, that are triggered through relating, yeah, with the world that we are in and the people that it contains. We also learn from nature, and we also learn from the cosmos, and we also learn from animals and plants and minerals and so forth. But there's something very fundamental in our life, you know, that relationships bring. They bring growth. Yeah? Would we not step into a relationship? Yes, Linda is right. We would be lonely. But if you grow up that way and you don't know that it could be different, you know, there was some studies that were done, you know, you're not really missing it. Okay, so you wouldn't know that you're lonely if you've never related. If you do relate and then you stop relating, then you will feel the lack of that. But there are much more fundamental things that would fall away, and that is, you know, the impulse to grow, yeah, the motivation to becoming better, to showing up in the best way you can, including, you know, the way you communicate yourself, the way you present yourself, etc. So I wanted to send this thought into our workshop here right at the beginning for us, so that we can, you know, have maybe a little more appreciation for the importance of our relationship, and not just the difficult ones, you know, just any relationship. Yeah, even just seeing people. Now we know that just seeing people without interacting with them affects our neurotransmitters. Anyone who's ever been through severe depression, you know, I always recommend to get up, to get dressed, to go out, maybe sit in a coffee shop for half an hour and just let other people be around you, because there's a physiological, a biological change that happens in us, and it happens on a physiological level. Now, as a consequence of that, and we talked a little bit about this, how these different layers of our humanness, yeah, the physical, the emotional, the mental, spiritual, and the energetic, how they're all intertwined. So as our physiology changes, our emotion changes. And as our emotion changes, our thoughts about our emotions and ourselves changes. And as that changes, or, you know, gets impacted, gets inspired, the way we spiritually contextualize life and ourselves also changes. It's also impacted. And if it wasn't for all of that, you know, the fact that we nowadays here in the early 21st century actually discussing things such as the energetic aspects of relationships tells us a lot. It tells us that we have come quite a long way as humans. Yeah? So it's not just about the physiological survival. It's not just about the emotional survival. It's not just about the intellectual inspiration and the esteem. It's not just about the spiritual context. There is more. There is interaction that occurs between us on unseen levels. And anyone who's ever studied a little bit, and maybe like a course, soft skills course at your work or whatever, has probably learned this, that only 7% of our communication is actually through words and actions. 93% of our interaction and relating with one another happens in the unseen. And I guess that's why we're here, because we're trying to understand how all this interacts with another and how we can better relate on these different layers, and therefore get or reap the benefits of relationships. Yeah. What is one of the benefit of relationships? If you think of it more in a sort of conceptual way, as opposed to not relating. Not what it can do for you, but what is actually happening there when we relate. How do we learn about ourselves? You ever thought about that? Anybody any thoughts about this?
So probably just learning about yourself from the reflections other people give you.
Yeah, in a way. In science, we call this feedback. Okay? It's not necessarily what they think about you or their opinion about you, but what happens as a result of stepping into the relationship with someone. Something happens there. Yeah. So there's a response there. I mean, even if you just relate to plants. Anybody ever put a lot of love into their garden and their plants? How do your plants respond? They start blossoming. They start growing for you. Yeah, they're interacting with you. They're giving you feedback. What happens if you don't care for your garden? You don't give a lot of attention to your flowers or your vegetable or whatever you're growing. There's going to be a response there, right? How are these plants going to respond? Without personifying them right now, you know, they're not as lively as, yeah, Jenna, go ahead.
Well, on the basic level, you've taken what I've always thought. This is because I've had plants and done this for a long time as well, and contemplated it a lot. That's for sure. One of the major things is, to me, is you've taken these plants in as a responsibility. So there's a relationship and a responsibility because they're kind of, you've put them there. So if you care for the responsibility of them, then they'll flourish, obviously, with water and what they need. And just like with an animal, you take it in as a responsibility and you make that a relationship. And if they're neglected, or you don't have all the right information, sometimes things can go kind of
right. But then we learn, right? Through trial and error.
And that's a big learning curve in its own. Yeah.
So you just brought another dimension into this, you know. The first dimension is obviously just the physical presence and the attention that we give, which is the response. You know, it's just, that is what we get. We get a response. Yeah, so whatever it is that we're doing or not doing, yeah, creates a response in, you know, whomever it concerns we're relating with. And that is then a feedback for us, right? It shows us, you know, whether, well, in the case of plants, whether this was good for the plant or not so good. Yeah, like you said, sometimes we don't know yet. We make a lot of mistakes if we get to water it, or, you know, don't realize that they need sunlight or not as much sunlight or something like that. And we get a feedback. Yeah, the plant dies or, you know, shrivels. And so we try something else. If it wasn't for that feedback, yeah, we wouldn't really learn how to get better at it. Now, the next dimension that you brought in is the responsibility part, is the actual relationship that we are allowing to form. Yeah, I think what you're referring to was the dependence. When we take on the responsibility for, let's say, pets is a good example, you know, that cannot really take care of themselves, so they need us as their caretaker. And we are, you know, like I'm paraphrasing here, but you said we you know, stepping into this responsibility. So we are willing to respond at all times, yeah, and with, you know, becoming or giving that responsibility justice, we are building a relationship. Yeah, so a continual feedback teaches us
nice.
what works well. Yeah, and we get something in return, right, from our pets. You know, maybe we get a tail wag or a little purr or, you know, cuddles, or they sleep with us at nights and stuff like that, where they're giving us, you know, the feedback that what we're doing for them is good for them, is conducive for them. Yeah. So this is very important to understand when it comes to valuing relationships. We started out in part one with talking about, you know, how our relationships impact our life. Yeah. And we found out the whole entire part one was all about, you know, finding out or realizing that relationships, our relationships, they pretty much affect us on all different levels of life. And there is no real way to not relate for us. Yeah, so that part is something that we need to keep in mind. We've also discussed, you know, whether there's like other reasons why we step into different kinds of relationships, yeah, such as karmic aspects. Clearly, we are not picking everybody that we are relating with, right? Some people are just there due to proximity. You know, we go to the same school, same class, or same soccer team, or whatever, or they live in the neighborhood, or they are our parents or our siblings. We didn't pick them. They were there basically before we decided to respond. Okay, so in our first part, we discussed this and all kind of agreed that, you know, relationships need to be done consciously, even those that we don't necessarily pick. Why? Because they have such a big impact on our life. Yeah. Then in part two, we continued our discussion and, you know, looked at the reality of things and reversed it and said, well, how big is, you know, the impact of the quality of our relationships that we have in our life? Remember this when we talked about, you know, how relationships can be conducive, how they can, you know, be very collaborative, they can motivate us, they can inspire us, but they can also impact us in a negative way. Remember this discussion? Yeah, so that was part two. And we actually mentioned a few things such as toxicity in relationship here. This is the first time when this came up. Yeah, namely, well, what to do when we find out that the interaction that we have, be it at work or with family members or romantic partners, is actually not conducive for us. Yeah, so that's a big part of what we want to cover today. Namely, first and foremost, how to build a healthy foundation, but then also, you know, summarizing basically how we can make changes, how we can get better in our responsibility. In part, oops, in part three, then, oh, this is numbering is wrong here. In part three, then, we discussed these, you know, issues with codependency that often occur, yeah, where we feel caught in those kind of relationships and don't really feel that we have a choice. And we've learned about attachment styles, yeah, the nature of attachment, yeah, that we care for some people more than we care for others, which can also lead to us getting triggered by certain people more than by others. Yeah, so we learned, this is mostly psychology, you know, when we relate with another and patterns and dynamics form, that there can be forms of attachment. And there's healthy attachments, which is the attachment that, say, a mother has to her children, or, you know, a father, respectively, or children to their mom, or children among one another, you know, or let's say your kindergarten teacher, or there are some you know, relationships in your life that are just more impactful at certain developmental stages, because you form stronger forms or stronger attachments with these people. Yeah. And these attachments have a function. Yeah, they determine ultimately how our empathy develops. So when we, and this is Sigmund Freud, we learned a little bit about this, and just in the concept, if you want to read this up, you know, that how the first 2 years of our life, yeah, how healthy they were, yeah, how healthy that bond was between the caretaker and, or between us and the caretaker, determines pretty much, yeah, until we become conscious about it and start healing work and consciousness work, determines how we conduct relationships, how we relate to others. This is quite frightening if you think about it, because, well, we, this is infant stage, we at this infant stage didn't pick that. Yeah, that's kind of just good luck or bad luck, yeah, in a way, yeah, as far as our psychological setup. Now, the cool thing is that as humans, we have fantastic repair mechanisms, fantastic ways to cope with this, to counteract with this. And one of these highest levels of self-correction mechanisms is consciousness, yeah, to become aware of things. Yeah. Now, learning about it, educating ourselves about it, always precedes the consciousness, because without knowing about it, it is very difficult for us to make conscious choices or to have a conscious insight about something. So let me give you an example. Let's say you find out that your mother or your father, mostly the mother in the old days, because, you know, it was mostly the mothers who did the caretaking, wasn't really that touchy-feely type. And also growing up, she wasn't really somebody who expressed her emotions openly and raised you accordingly, you know, basically told you, you know, to just comply and to not speak up too much, and, you know, to just be a good kid, good in quotation marks. Yeah, this can lead to severe attachment issues later down the road. Yeah, and this has nothing to do with good or bad. This is just like how we were introduced to love and to the expression of love is done, at least for as long as or until we form a more conscious way of relating and interacting with people, determines how we then relate and conduct our relationships. So there's always a little bit of work there for everybody, because let me just really break this to you. Everybody has insufficient parents. Everybody does. It is impossible for parents to provide, let's say, the 100%, yeah, of what you need. And even if it was close, okay, your parents are people too, and they have attachment issues, and they have relationship issues and trauma, etc. themselves. Okay, so that's when the karmic discussion came in, yeah, how things can sometimes inherit from one generation to the next, because, you know, it's been sort of, you know, the way love and relationship and all the interaction that is needed for that was conveyed, you know, maybe was always done that way, or it's based on certain traditions or even ethnic and cultural guidelines, okay, that can have an impact on how we conduct relationships. All that is only until we start becoming a little more aware of what these sorry, what these mechanisms are that are going on inside of us, yeah, and the discernment of which of these forms of expressing love and interacting in love are conducive for us and which aren't. And this is where most of you are at. If we then, in addition to that, also perceive things in, you know, beyond the intellectual, on a spiritual level and perhaps even on an energetic level, yeah, when we start seeing these dimensions in relationships, yeah, this is not just about, let's say, survival. This is not just about not wanting to be alone. This is not just about provision. This is not just about looking good for the neighbors. No, this is more. This is about committing. This is about, you know, you said the responsibility, Janet, but there's more to that. You know, it's about trust. It's about, you know, building something together. It's about collaborating, etc. That's about the union of things, which is also part of our pre-programming. That's more of a spiritual value, because here is, you know, where we bring in the ideals, yeah, how we ideally want it, and we form concepts around family, for example. Yeah, what are our family values? These are all, they're all coming up or playing out in the spiritual realm. Yeah, they're not really written down anywhere. It's just something that we would like to manifest, that we would like to bring into this life based on our values. And the energetic realm, yeah, the energetic dimension of a relationship then reveals even more, also often more healing work, because we can realize, even if we just look at it only ourselves, that there's a lot of automatic stuff, yeah, that there's a lot of things that we are still completely unaware of, especially if some of these things that we grew up with were not that conducive, yeah, where we perhaps didn't really develop a good sense of self, or where we didn't really learn to communicate ourselves well, or where we didn't learn how to trust, or where there were other things, you know, other needs that we had that weren't met, and we didn't really learn how to say no, to how to set boundaries, or even just how to self-express. Yeah, so the energetic realm opens that up, because we can begin to see that there are still, regardless of how much we know intellectually and how much we idealize spiritually, okay, how much of that is still invisible to us? Do you guys know what I'm talking about? These invisible mechanisms, such as projection, such as absorption, yeah, absorbing other people's energies. That's one of those. So then we took a little sidestep in part 5, because there were so many questions that came up in you in regard to these toxic patterns and relationships, and particularly narcissism, and also the dynamics between empaths and narcissists. So we discussed this in length, and also learned about this this issue with the merging and fusion, which is a spiritual and an energetic problem, yeah, if someone is unaware. Now, today we want to talk about how to, you know, basically, you know, draw a line, create a clean slate, yeah, in our heads first, yeah, like how can we approach this ideally, okay, to either heal a relationship or to start new relationships, yeah, how can we approach this? So before we go into the pillars of healthy relationships and foundation, I wanted to ask you, I wanted to start out here with the discussion, namely, what are the most common issues for you in general? Yeah. If you look back at the entirety of your relationship career, not just romantic, please, guys, what are some of the patterns that you can see that are weaving through all your relationships? Who wants to share? Boundaries, Linda. That's a good one. So you notice that no matter what kind of relationship you have, there always seem to be boundary issues. Would you like to elaborate on that? What kind of boundary issues? There's different kinds of boundary issues.
For me, I've learned just recently that it's always me, it's not them. And I have no boundary. And so if somebody says, would you do blah, blah, blah? My answer is always yes. And if I have something else that comes up in between, I would never consider saying, hey, this other thing came up. And so I do it to myself.
Okay, so you're just referring to it. I suppose, I'm assuming that you mean a problem. No, a problem with it. Yeah, you said it's always you, it's always you. So what I hear you say is that you're being blamed for things when they don't go well, or somehow you take on, all conflicts and problems that occur, and make them your responsibility. You have a problem with saying no to, like fixing this or taking care of this, or
Yeah, and I'm
the rest.
finding that it's me that's taking them on. It's not even people necessarily asking me to take them on.
Yeah, and this is obviously, our personal healing work where we have to investigate this a little bit, because sometimes it's both. Sometimes it's the track record that we have. Yeah. Oh, Linda always says yes. If you need something, just call her. She'll do it for you, right? And so, do you know what I mean?
That
Depending on the
stamp
kind of.
across my forehead. Everybody talks about this.
Yeah. So, I mean, especially at work, I see this with people at work a lot. Where they, just sort of kind of invisibly emit this, and everybody just loads everything onto them because there's a certain receptibility for it. And that has to do with track record. It's actually a lot easier than we think it is. It's literally the track record that we have. Yeah. So if we always say yes, people will presume that we will say yes. Yeah. And if somebody always says no, we will also presume that they'll say no. So when it comes to boundaries, obviously there is a little more to just saying yes or no. There is a certain discernment that is needed to find out what is appropriate. Yeah, so it's always about appropriate or inappropriate boundaries. Now, some things are okay, or in some situations it's okay, yeah, to do this particular thing that you're being asked, to maybe do a favor or help out with. But then there are situations where it's maybe not okay. So that has to do with discernment. That has to do with a deeper level of feedback here. You have to go into feedback with yourself. So for most of us who are on the codependent side of things, yeah, and who have boundary issues, but a particular kind of boundary issues, namely only the kind of boundary that implies saying no. Okay, so those of us who have issues with saying no, we need to go more into feedback with ourselves. That's the part that we are missing out on. Yeah, just here as a tip, yeah, as to where this needs to occur, Linda. When it's all about not being able to say no, we need to look in within and ask ourselves, is this okay for me? So that step, yeah, is this okay for me? Get submitted. And that's why we often build, form resentments and frustrations, yeah, as a consequence of that, because there's an automatism in us that says yes, and then we realize much later that it was actually not good for us, right? That's what I'm hearing from what you're sharing. So the trick with that is, you know, to go in and ask yourself, what's, you know, so difficult about saying no? Because I'm sure there's people in your life that you know that have no problems with saying no. Do you know somebody?
I think
Know
mostly the
anybody?
people who set those boundaries are people who are, like you talked about, the people that everybody knows will say no. And so they don't have to worry about boundaries because
Uh-huh.
they've already sort of set it up as no.
Well, they have boundaries, but their boundaries may also be inappropriate. Yeah, because if you
Yeah.
always say no, that's basically, you know, negating the relation the relation part or the feedback part or the response
Yeah.
part. Yeah. So
Yeah.
here now we're entering territory of toxic stuff, because if somebody has that as an MO, right? Nope, 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 not doing it, nope. All right. Then there is something there that they need to look at. And a lot
Yeah.
of
That
times,
healthy balance.
yeah, it could help them, you know, to actually relate a little more, you know, and to go into this interaction with others. Yeah. So whatever, you know, they perceive as successful, when it is MO and when it's strategic, that's then when we talk about narcissism. So when narcissism is strategic, the way the way boundaries goes with narcissists is basically in the first weeks of the relationship is yes, of course, everything for you, of course, no boundaries. And then gradually the boundaries get tighter, tighter, tighter to a point where, you know, you don't even know what's happening. You know, they were so different at the beginning of the relationship. But we talked enough about narcissism. It's just that you need to understand anybody who has anybody else issues with boundaries here in this group present.
Yeah, Jona, I'm a big one
Yeah.
for that.
Okay, so you know, obviously this is you know, a big topic, and you can't really, you know, resolve this in 5 minutes. But
Yeah.
you know, you need to investigate, you know, whether there's a specific type you have more issues
Yeah.
with than with others. So that would give you clues as to what is playing out there. There's maybe an attachment that is playing out. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
you know, sometimes it's harder for women to say no to a man, or vice versa. Yeah. Sometimes it's really hard for men to say no to a woman. There's a lot of men out there who have a hard time saying no to a woman, partially because they were raised that way. Yeah.
Yeah. Can I share
Or
something that I've been trying to, sorry.
yeah, if it relates to boundaries, yes, please.
Yeah, it does. I just would love your feedback because it's sort of like an internal observation that's only come through for me in the last sort of year about the lack of boundaries relative to people pleasing, and that I think growing up with a very emotionally unpredictable and sort of just an unstable environment with a lot of arguing in the household. I think people pleasing to keep the peace or do whatever was necessary at all costs to keep the peace between everybody, and then in the process a serious disconnection from self to the point that you abandon yourself even if that's necessary to keep the peace, and then over years and years that disconnection from self grows even worse, and then you are not able to say no, and like somebody mentioned earlier, I think it might have been Janet, saying how it's no one else's fault, and you kick yourself going, why did I say yes to that? Or because after the fact you realize, like, actually no, that doesn't align with me, or I'm just trying to I don't know what I'm trying to do, I guess. probably a combination of being accepted, being loved, being seen, as well as avoiding any arguments or pain or conflict. Yeah.
Yeah, see, you guys all share very similar things, that you often find yourself in situations where you don't even know why you're allowing it. Yeah, it's just automatic. Yeah. And so that's the part that we've talked about in codependency and attachment, because here's something that plays out that clearly doesn't have anything to do with your state of awareness today. Yeah. And you built the bridge here, Mandy, you know, because no, it's an inner child aspect. Okay. You developed a coping mechanism, not just you know, most of us here, a coping mechanism back in the days. Yeah. Way back then.
Yeah.
Okay. Based on the conditions and the attachments that we had at the time. Yeah. That helped us to deal with, you know, adversities. Yeah, remember we had one session about all these adversities that psychologists, you know, put together as these ACEs, you know, these ACEs. And you know, there's nothing wrong with doing that when you're like 4 years old, you know. But if you never go back and actually update that, right? Because as a 4-year-old, or maybe even 6 or 8-year-old, you don't really have that many tools. You don't really have a lot of power to change, you know, your parents. You know, you're not going to say to your parents, hey, stop arguing, this is a really toxic environment for a child growing up. You know, that's not what we do, right? We're trying to mitigate, we're trying to triangulate, we're trying to like somehow, you know, like, hey, mom, how are you doing today? Is there anything I can do for you to keep her in a good mood? This is the first thing that we, you know, sort of come up with as a child. Yeah. As a working coping mechanism. The problem with that is that when we're grown-ups, that doesn't really work anymore. Yeah, because if we always do that, yeah, if that's our go-to, like with any interaction that we have, yeah, then we're going to end up as a doormat. Yes, then we're going to end up feeling, you know, taken advantage of or whatever. We're constantly getting into these places where we end up, you know, having to resolve issues for others. You know, this could apply to any of the archetypes, you know, that has to do with, you know, trying to fix others, trying to, you know, take over, control issues come from that coping mechanism, etc., etc. But the main aspect here, yeah, that we need to remember in our healing process is that what all this goes back to is not wanting to feel a certain feeling. And it's really important that we become aware of how powerful, in a negative way, that can be, how big of a drive in our life that can become. If we've experienced things such as you pointed out, an insecure, an unpredictable environment emotionally, yeah, and as a coping mechanism, you developed the form of pleasing, a form of, you know, compensating, mitigating, yeah. And you continue doing that as means to make yourself or protect yourself from feeling this negative feeling, yeah, then that is what needs to be healed. So at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter why, you know, if it's the approval or the attention or the peacekeeping or the control or whatever, there's many different aspects to that. We covered some of that in the projection part when we talked about projection. Yeah, what is it actually that we are projecting? Yeah, and you know, even peacekeeping, yeah, and people pleasing are emotional manipulation and control mechanisms. Yeah, do you guys get that? It's an attempt to manipulate the mood, and the way other people interact in our presence, based on us not wanting to feel a particular feeling. We don't want to feel conflict. We don't want to feel confrontation. Yeah. And why is that? Because at the time when we first, experienced confrontation and conflict, we felt powerless. We didn't have any tools to resolve this, so we had to use these projection mechanisms, which is very, very normal for humans. Okay. As a grown-up, though, we have more tools. We have diplomacy. We have the ability to negotiate. We have the ability to speak up. We can talk about how something makes us feel. We can agree, that this is not a good thing, and that, it has to be mutual, etc. We can bring our values in. We can, we have multiple ways, of dealing with our fear of confrontation. Multiple ways as grown-ups. However, if we still use old coping mechanisms, from childhood, then that's a sign that this part of us didn't grow. It got stuck there. This becomes the most aware to us, especially in regard to people pleasing, when you realize how automatic it is. Linda, you mentioned that. And when you realize that you're doing this, whatever this is, they're trying to mitigate, trying to, make them like you, trying to get approval, all of the above. Even if you don't even care about the people. Has it happened to any one of you? You find yourself in this people-pleasing automatism, that doesn't even consider if these people are even important to you or if you even like them. Anybody ever pleased somebody that you don't even like?
Absolutely, all the time. That's how it became obvious.
Yeah, exactly, right? It's like, wait a minute, wait a minute. Yes, I see your hands. Something is not.
Isn't it like that thing where people will be in their family and, take out all their troubles and, get angry at, and easily the people closest to them, they'll treat the worst, and then they'll go out and you can go out and you can, I can, whoever.
No,
I noticed this a while ago. They go out and oh, that's something different, and they go out and they're nice to,
that's a different,
like
that's fakeness. That's incongruence, inauthenticity. That's how you try to like pretend. That's a form of pretend. That's different. No, what we're talking about here is the missing part, the part in us that is not connecting. There is something in us that doesn't connect. And that has to do with empathy, guys. And I really need all of you to listen carefully here, because the actual true definition of empathy has that part included. If we do not go into feedback with ourselves, our empathy is distorted and can lead to us doing things that we think we're doing this out of the goodness of our heart, and because we're empaths and we're so energetically sensitive, which just serves to cover up something that we are not capable of doing. Namely, to go in and to ask ourselves if we want to do this, if this is a conscious choice. If we really want it, if it matters to us. And whenever someone discovers that this piece is missing, okay, doesn't mean that you're not empathic, but it means that there's an issue around empathy, with the management of your empathy isn't going well and requires different approaches. But mostly what it requires is to let go of the externalization of your sense of self. So from a psychological point of view, what the child does when it tries to mitigate, prevent, and sort of emotionally manipulate the situation so that peace can be kept, which is a covert control mechanism. It's one that we can all do as humans. We can all do this. We can all rip a joke and everybody laughs, and that, you know, sort of releases tension and so forth. We do this all the time. Yeah. But if this is the only way, you know, the pleasing, for example, and the mitigating and the taking on responsibility for everything, if that's the only way we can deal with things, then in psychology we talk about this as mismanaged empathy. Yeah, because we're actually literally forgetting. Yeah, forgetting. It's not gone, but we're forgetting to step into relationship with ourselves. Yeah, we're super empathic with other people, but super not empathic with ourselves. Yeah, anybody raise their hand? Yeah, when it comes to what you truly want, what you truly need, what you truly want to express, anything that has to do with you, the sense of you, almost blind there. So when we are centered, when we can step into this relationship with ourselves in a healthy way, not in an unhealthy way would be either no relationship with ourselves at all, or, you know, in the narcissistic way, which would be, well, all that matters is my relationship with myself. Although it's not exactly that like that. There's actually also a lack of relationship with self, but it plays out differently. Yeah, so when we are being centered, not self-centered, but centered, we are always connected within. And yes, sometimes we, you know, like all of us, we experience fluctuations. Some days we're more centered than other days, and we need to do things such as grounding, you know, and helping ourselves to connect and, you know, release things and clear things. It's just like any relationship, yeah. And those are all hallmarks of any relationship. And when we are centered, then we can step into a free flow, a mutual energy exchange with others. Then you know the difference between what's yours and what's theirs. You know how to express your boundaries. You also respect the other person's boundaries. You know, one of those things that I came to realize in my own healing journey, you know, having been in a place that you guys report about for decades, that the issue with boundaries that I have is not just one way. I also have a problem with accepting other people's boundaries just in a different way. It's not that I try to overpower them or that I, you know, try to like openly negate other people's boundaries. No. I try to manipulate my way, wiggle my way through, yeah, with my energetic sensitivity and my empathy and so forth, to sway them, to change their boundaries. Anybody ever been honest enough with themselves to admit that to themselves? So lack of boundaries also, it goes both ways, guys. Yeah? It always goes both ways. It's not just that you have a problem with saying no and that's why you're being taken advantage of. It's also that on some other level that is unaware to you, you are not fully respecting other people's boundaries either. And how
No,
could you be, because you've never learned it? Yes, go ahead.
sorry, Jona, I'm not sure. We're supposed to raise a hand, or can we just ask something?
I saw your hand. I just needed to
Sorry.
finish the, yeah,
Oh, no,
like,
that's fine.
no,
I
but
wasn't
you can
sure the
always interrupt.
procedure.
Okay.
I don't want to talk over you.
No, sometimes you have to. So go ahead.
Thanks. No, it's just what you said resonates so much, but I'm a bit stuck with something. So what's happened for me is through someone else's need for boundaries, I have realized that through someone else's boundaries and my non-aware or disrespect or whatever the word would be in that situation has made me realize my lack of boundaries. And so that, like what you just said, hit a nerve, because it's taken that for me to have a good look at myself and see, wow, I've never had any idea that I lacked so much in boundaries. And how do I start to build a sort of a healthy foundation of my own? And then hopefully if I start building that, I'll be able to have more respect for others, because I often just take it so personally when people say no, they're not available, or they've already got plans or something. I'll take something like that on board so personally, and it's so not necessary, because I actually wish I could be more like them.
Exactly. Yeah, not the last part, but you know, that's a very good insight, Mandy. Yeah, this is an important step in the healing process, especially with boundaries. You know, the honesty with ourselves. Yeah. And admitting that to ourselves, that we are actually the masters of manipulating boundaries. Yeah. We just do it in a softer way. Yeah. And because we have this almost stoic belief that the worst thing in life is narcissism and selfishness. Yeah. We'll do anything to not appear as selfish. But a lot of times, yeah, and this is something that you can see on an energetic level much more clearly than on a, like, say, everyday interaction level. A lot of times that's far from the truth. So most people who I've met here in my practice or in my personal life who are codependents, who have issues with saying no, are master manipulators. Yeah? And they're the ones who require constant maintenance and constant attention, versus those who maybe say no a little too much. Yeah, at least allow me the freedom, you know, to go in and ask myself, do I want this? Is this okay for me? So counting myself to this group, like, don't forget that when I talk about these things, yeah, I can see it, because you got to be one to know that, to see that. Yeah, I can see it very clearly in people, which is why the healing process sometimes is a bit tricky, because you're going to have to really work with your ego aspects in that. But let's shift our attention once more into, like, oh, okay, so how can we not just, you know, heal something that we've discovered? This isn't just about eradicating flaws and, you know, getting better. It's obviously for us in our personal life, it is. But when we look at the bigger aspect of this, we first have to ask ourselves what we even want. What do we even want? Yeah, and here, this slide is very complex, but you know, we went through this already. Yeah, this mutual energy exchange, yeah, this free flow that we all so wish for. Yeah, we don't have to have, you know, like all these walls of protection up, and where we don't need to mitigate, and where we don't need to do any of this, where we can just freely interact. Yeah, like most of us can with our pets, or with our animal, our plants and so forth, yeah, or even nature or God or whatever. Yeah, it requires a few abilities that we need to learn in the course of our life. We're not being born with them, guys. That's the important part here. Yeah, that's why we spent a few minutes on realizing how important our relationships are. That's where we learn this. Yeah, that's where we learn discernment, so that we can decide whom we want to interact with and whom we don't want to interact with, or how we want to interact with people. Yeah. So that's the important part here to keep in mind. We're not born with these abilities. We have to learn them. We have to obtain them through relationships. It is through the relationships and the problems that you experienced in your relationship, the pain that you've experienced in or through your relationships, that teaches you that. Which is why we always look at patterns if we want to discover what it is that we should focus on, yeah, in our healing process. So going back to the, conception of that, and like, how can one build a strong and healthy foundation, yeah, or repair, yeah, or rebuild a healthy foundation. Yeah, this is possible to be done in even a relationship, even with a romantic partner, if both agree. If both agree, anything is possible. Yeah, and for that, we've basically talked about all these things, but for that, we need to look at the pillars of a strong relationship. And when I say strong, I mean happy and lasting and sustainable. Sustainable in the truest meaning of the word, not the political kind of sustainable, like where it is conducive for both. Yeah, it's good for both. Can you guys follow me here? Yeah, that's what a healthy foundation is. When it's good for both, it will naturally grow. Things will come up. They will not magically, but they will heal themselves as they come up. As both are aligned, yeah, with these goals, these over relationship values, yeah, growth will occur organically. And this is what we want to like say, navigate toward. And as we are going through these, we will discover some issues that we have that has nothing to do with others. It comes from relating with others in the past, including our parents, our sibling, etc., and even, karmic family, karmic collective, ethnic, cultural, national background. All these things play into how we interact and also what our experiences are there. But as we are growing and maturing, we are realizing how all these things that we're discovering there, yeah, like flaws, imperfections, transgressions, etc., how they are all part of the healing process. They are all part of that growth, of that evolution. Yeah, so we look at them not because we want to beat ourselves up or, we want to like take it all on and, go and crawl into our cave and throw a pity party. No, what we want to do is look at them with a bone crushing honesty and say, what's my part in this? Yeah. How come that I always end up in this place where, I feel like I carry the whole entire burden of the relationship? Well, maybe it is because you have a hard time saying no. Then ask yourself, why do I have a hard time saying no? What is underneath that? Oh, okay. I had, unstable and let's say emotionally insecure circumstances growing up, yeah, in my family with my parents, maybe experienced trauma, all kinds of like adverse experiences there. Sure, yeah. They have forced us in that time to come up with coping mechanisms, but that's then. Yeah. Today is different. You're still impacted by that, but just because that was like 20 or 30 or 60 years ago doesn't mean that you can't change it now. That's what growth is, and this is what we've learned through these painful experiences, through the struggles in our relationships. The part that we need to realize here, and this comes from a higher vibratory perspective, is that it is our pains that help us grow. Our imperfections that make us evolve. Yeah, the wisdom that we form in the course of our journey. These pearls of wisdom that we collect throughout our life. They originate in a pain, in a fear, in a resistance. Did you guys know where pearls come from? Anybody know where pearls come from? Not plastic pearls, the real ones. Anybody know?
It's a grain of
Oyster.
sand, an oyster.
Comes from an oyster, okay. And how do pearls form inside the oyster? Anybody know?
It's the grain of sand that rolls around in there and it transforms into a pearl.
It's the annoyance.
It's the imperfection. It's the intruder. It's the contamination. It's the pain. It's an intrusion, the grain of sand, that causes scarring in the tissue of the oyster, which then causes the oyster to release a bunch of chemicals that then calcify into a pearl. Isn't that amazing? If you look at your pain, your adverse experiences, and all that you, well, could learn from this as pearls, as opportunities for you to grow and to shine, and to evolve. Maybe that's a thing I should do here at transCODES. Maybe I should, create some like pearl necklaces where every time we do a course or have a new insight, put a new pearl in our necklace. Yeah, just as a reminder.
I love that. That's a great idea.
Yeah, just as a reminder how valuable
Yeah.
these lessons, these contaminations or adverse experiences are, because they trigger in us the courage and yes, it's born out of pain. It's born out of an imperfection or transgression or shame or guilt or whatever, but they trigger in us the energy to wanting to grow beyond it. Yeah, and that's what we mean with transcendence. A better word, the word transcendence doesn't really ring a bell on people. I noticed, yeah. Well, because transcendence means overcoming your attachments, overcoming your fear, stepping into the courage and the willingness to face it, to work with it. That's what transcendence means. And I'm a big proponent of, recognizing, also appreciating the opportunity, the learning opportunity in every experience. It is our ego's notion that some experiences are good experiences and some experiences are bad experiences, right? And our ego externalizes the bad experiences and internalizes the good experiences, which then leads to us fundamentally not learning anything, because we blame everything that feels bad on others, and claim everything for ourselves that is good. And oh no, what happens if your framework changes? Anybody notice that? Every time you have a new insight, your framework changes. And all of a sudden, what you deem as good and what you deem as bad experience may change. The ego cannot do that. The ego cannot grow into that. It is not the ego. We're the healing takes place, guys. It's in your consciousness. It's in that part in you, yeah, that connects your body, your emotions, your thoughts, and your spiritual awareness with your heart. And that's where you then realize, you know what? I may have felt like a victim all my life, but I can see my part in this now. And yes, I can explain it psychologically due to my education, you know, due to me, and this could be you as well, you know, taking the time to invest in myself and learn about these things. Because before I knew anything about alcoholism, for example, I didn't know what I was experiencing. I didn't understand that. I thought it was because I was a bad girl. That's why my daddy is so mean. Hmm? It wasn't until 18, 20 years later, yeah, that I grabbed the textbooks about alcoholism and understood what was going on. And now, you know, 25 years later, I could see my parts in that. Not in childhood, but, you know, in those first relationships that I had. I know I shared a lot about this here in the past part, so I don't want to repeat this. It's not about me. I just want to show you guys that this work that you're doing here is a pearl. Okay, this is creating pearls. It's transcending your pain into love. Love for growth, love for, you know, yourself ultimately. To reinstate this piece that is missing, the feedback with yourself. It is one of the most advanced and most sophisticated things that make us human. Because guess what? That is not an ability animals have. That is what makes us unique as humans. The consciousness, if you will, and the ability to change the way we want to see something, the way we want to deal with things, and the way we frame this. That is our true power as humans. That's the power of consciousness, which is why we constantly want to work on this. And at the end of the day here, at the end of your healing journey, you come to the conclusion that, well, you know, the more you heal, the more pearls you're going to end up having on your necklace, the more valuable it becomes, your necklace. You know what I mean? It's up to you. This journey of healing our relationships has to do with understanding. It's a preparation, really, the initiation into understanding our bigger cosmological relationship that we have. Yeah? It prepares you for understanding the relationship that you have with your soul self. And beyond that, it prepares you to understanding your relationship with spirit and divine consciousness. And all that is necessary for us, yeah, to ascend, if you will. Yeah, I don't like this word, you know this, but to evolve into higher spiritual hierarchies, which do not take place here in 3D. Yeah, that's beyond 3D. And here on your screen, you can see, you know, what I have worked out. Here's the pillars of, you know, healthy relationships and ultimately love integrity. Yeah, a higher level of integrity in all matters love. You know, not just romance, but of course that's a big part. At the core of it is a fundamental understanding of empathy in us that needs to be there. We all need to know, you know, how much of what we're feeling is ours, and how much of that is maybe not ours. And even if you're not in a romantic relationship, yeah, we always interacting with another collectively. Now that's why I report about collective energies, because they always impact us. It's the outer weather condition, the combination of all of our thoughts and emotions and sentiments. That's a field, it's an energy field that we interact with. You can't see the slides, Cindy. Anybody else? Are you seeing the slide?
I don't see them.
You don't.
Yeah, I
You
can't
haven't
see
been
them either,
seeing them?
Jona.
Oh,
No. I think it's because
disappointing.
I'm logged in from my phone and not from my laptop, maybe.
Okay, that is a possibility. Anybody on their
Yeah.
computer? Me either. Okay, sorry guys. I thought you did. I thought we clarified this.
I thought,
I'm.
I thought you said at the beginning that, I don't know, I just figured that.
It was complaining about
I thought
something,
you
but
already,
then
yeah, I thought
somebody
you
said, "I
knew
see
that
it."
it wasn't. At the top of the screen that I have that has just the Mastering
Mm-hmm.
Relationships introduction slide with your beautiful face.
Okay.
At the very top in gray, it says, with the little icon from the service here, waiting to view transcode energy
Okay,
healing.
so you're not seeing my slides. Okay, so this
No.
is what the error message was about. I apologize for this. In the video, I'll add the slides to this. Okay, so let me read this for you. So at the preparation, yeah, that's basically the pillar number 1. Yeah, that's before that's the whole thing is empathy, and you need to know this about yourself, how you relate to others just in general. And this is a big deal if we look at it from a perspective of romantic relationships. You need to determine the level of empathy that the other person has. The reason why I'm putting this on 0 here is because right there, guys, you could have eliminated the majority of your really traumatic relationships in your life. Because isn't that what we come to realize, after the fact?
Sorry, Jona,
Other
I'm a bit
person.
lost. And when you mean 0, what are you referring to? Sorry.
I'm referring to a slide that you're not seeing right now. Okay, so
Oh,
just listen
sorry.
to my
Okay,
words.
gotcha.
Okay, so
Gotcha. Yeah.
that is before the pillars. Okay, and I'm explaining how if you just do that, how you could have or can knock out more than half of your really traumatic relationship issues if you determine the empathy level that the other has. Because at the end of the day, after the fact, when a relationship fails, what do you see? You see that the other person did not have the same level of empathy, or let's say appropriate empathy,
Wow.
as you do.
That's
And some people, like
big one.
narcissists, have, and also people with some certain mental illnesses, have distorted, impacted, or absent empathy. That's a mental illness. Okay. So this is my tip for you. If there's anything that you remember that. Always check on empathy. Test it. Oh, watch
I'm
a
gonna
movie
try
together.
log in.
Yeah. Test empathy levels. Because if you find out that the other person has issues there with stepping into other people's shoes, seeing things from the other person's perspective, considering other people's needs, caring about what the other person feels. If you find out that there is an issue there with the other person, all I can say to you is run. don't go a step further. So pillar number 1, values. Okay, you need to know what your values are, and you need to communicate them. We all do this. We, in the courting phase and the dating phase, we tell each other stories from past relationships or whatever, and what's important for us. But what's more important actually is that you know for yourself what your values are. Because if you don't know your values, it's going to be very difficult for you to communicate this clearly. So be a stickler. Tell what your values are. Don't hide them. Say them out loud. Pillar number 2, share your hopes and dreams. Become aware of what your hopes and dreams are. Most of that is unconscious. Make the unconscious conscious. Make a vision board. Work with this. Determine it for yourself. Because when you determine this for yourself, it's a lot easier for you to detect when you fall for this unhealthy merging that I talked about in part 5. Where the relationship becomes a fantasy bond because there's a shared illusion that both buy into. And if you have a record of your own hopes and dreams, independent of a partner, but just for yourself, it's a lot easier for you to see where that gets corrupted. It's very, very important that we become more aware of our own hopes and dreams. Then number 3 is become aware of your own attachment styles and watch the other person's attachment styles. That requires a little bit of education. That requires a little bit of inner child work. Something, Mandy, that you shared earlier, the tendencies that you have that originate back in your childhood. Well, guess what? Other people have that too, but they're not always the same. And sometimes, actually very often in relationships, conflicts occur because both inner children, unresolved inner children, are having fights with another, which ends up creating very immature relationships because it's literally, 2 3-year-olds interacting and not the mature adult that you are. Number 4, boundaries. We talked about that earlier. That's really, really important that we become aware of our boundaries, regardless of the person, that we all have certain boundaries. And yes, we all may have to work on them, but it's important that we work ourselves through them. And especially, and this is really, really important here, again, one of those things that would help you to knock out, the really severely traumatizing relationships is no-goes. Have a working list with no goals. What are the things that you, under no circumstances, are going to accept in your life? And strengthen that. That's what creates your stance. And then obviously, the better you get at enforcing your boundaries, the stronger your stance becomes. Start with the no goals and make it a discipline. Cultivate not letting yourself down with your no goals. Then number 5, building trust. You have to learn how to build trust. Trust is not automatic, guys. That's one of those new age myths. That's the whole problem with the twin soul and soulmate and all that kind of stuff, because it creates the fantasy that there is like this person out there where you have to do no work, where everything is just perfect and it's going to stay like this forever into eternity. Yes, you're laughing, Mandy, but that is how sick that is.
Oh man,
that idea. Trust has to be built. It's a lot of work, and it has to be tested. And it requires you to have good boundaries, because you have to make sure that, you know, you're pacing, and, you know, the progression of things, yeah, how we learn to trust one another, that is organic. It doesn't happen overnight. That's a fantasy, that's an illusion. And yes, when we find similarities in the other person, and when we feel aligned in our values, and when we have similar hopes and dreams, you know, we tend to trust people more. But we need to check on that. There's 2 wonderful workshops here, part 1, part 2, trust, where I'm laying this out step by step, how you can build trust, how you can test trust. It's work, guys. Intimacy. Not just physical intimacy. Physical intimacy is one of the easier ones. True intimacy, letting somebody into your heart. Yeah, opening yourself up for your vulnerabilities. Feeling safe enough, emotionally safe enough to express yourself, to express your concerns, to share your fears. That's what intimacy is. Yes, and it also entails the physical vulnerabilities and insecurities. And by the way, these pillars have to happen in the order in which I've listed them here. Yeah, without trust, there is no intimacy, guys. Yeah, and without boundaries, there is no trust. Pillars number 7, emotional expression. You know, it doesn't really matter how emotionally or spiritually rich you are if you're unable to express that right. And expressing it right doesn't necessarily mean elaborate or in some kind of eloquent intellectual way. Expressing it right means expressing it so that the other one can understand it, so that it arrives there to whom it concerns. So emotional literacy is a little bit of a mixture of, yeah, learning a little bit more. Remember, we talked about this. We have 34,000 emotions, roughly. That's what science says as humans. But the average vocabulary that we use to express our emotions is 6 or 8. And some people use only 2 or 3 words to express their emotions, good or bad, or so-so. That is not emotional literacy. You cannot express the emotional richness that you have. Even if you use, you know, the fundamental vocabulary such as sad, angry, happy. You know, what kind of sadness? What kind of anger? What kind of happiness? What kind of guilt? What kind of grief? Yeah, those things need to be practiced. It's usually our friendships, guys, yeah, where that takes place, where we have this emotional playground where we can learn how to express this. I do this every day when I talk to people. For me, it's something that comes mostly from the linguistic part, because English is not my native language. So when I listen to people in English expressing certain feelings, every single time I'm listening to them, I'm learning new ways of expressing things. Because if you believe it or not, my vocabulary in English is relatively restricted compared to the vocabulary that I have in my native language. So emotional expression is also something that needs to be learned, and it happens in our emotional playgrounds, yeah, with our friends, also with our co-workers, family, and yeah, also relationships. But that's usually where we need it the most. So remember this: friendships are part of the pillars of healthy relationships. Yeah, we all need friendships. It's not enough to just have like one partner and nobody else. Then we have to work with and become aware of our traumas, of our triggers, of our blocks. We all have trauma, triggers, and blocks. We all do. We need to become aware of them, and in some cases, if they impact the relationship, which they often do, express them to our partner as good as we can. Yeah, because some blocks are so blocky that we don't even know that we have them. Do you guys know what I mean? Yeah, blind spots. Next, number 9 is spiritual expression. Now, you may think that that is, not everybody's cup of tea. But let's resume for a moment what spiritual aspects of life are. Which parts of your life, guys, are spiritual in nature? Any suggestions?
Sometimes I like to consider that most parts of my life are spiritual because, like, if I'm making something for myself to eat, that's caring for myself. It kind of almost takes me back to number 1 as values, of living our life by value and I guess discipline. And there's another word I'm not thinking of right now.
Cultivating.
Cultivating. That it just bleeds through to be most things. Like if somebody asked you, like if somebody asked me today, what are you doing tomorrow? And I was just like, on one level at the root chakra, it was like, I'm going to the store again. I go to the store on Fridays. But I was just answered, I was like, I'm going to love, I'm going to laugh, I'm going to be happy. That's my plan for tomorrow. And to me, that is a little bit, I didn't think of it, but I wasn't trying to be spiritual. I was just.
No, I know what you mean. I understand what you mean, Janet. And as a matter of fact, this is a sign of higher conscious level, because the higher the conscious level, the more spiritual everything becomes. Yeah, you recognize that the immaterial nature of your life is fundamentally spiritual. Anything that's immaterial. So the food, eating the food is a physical need, that's a material thing. But the way you prepare the food, the way you pick the vegetables or the ingredients, and the way you treat them, the way you cut them, the way you arrange them, the way you prepare them, the way you set your table, the way you chew it, the way you eat it, the more conscious you become about all that flows into eating, yeah, the more spiritual it becomes. So anything, regardless of that, anything that has to do with love, that has to do with forgiveness, that has to do with courage, that has to do with allowing, that has to do with your heart, that has to do with your soul, that has to do with healing. Those are all spiritual aspects of life. Everything that has to do with provision, survival, owning, the material aspects of life, right? And how the neighbors see me, and my accomplishments, my achievements, what a good of a citizen I am, and so forth. This is all 3D related, yeah? Okay, and the distinction here is that anything that's 3D related, okay, is not worse or anything. There's no judgment in that, but it fades. It fades, right? It rusts, it withers away. And when we die, all that disappears. Spiritual aspects of life don't. Yeah, they're immaterial. So then number 10, healing, becomes a very important relationship aspect further down the road. Namely, when there are things that occur that, create pain in one or the other or both. And we need to learn how to mend these things, how to work this out, yeah, how to heal together. And then number 11, and this is actually, much more instrumental than here number 11, but it often doesn't play out until later in the relationship, and we can more clearly recognize the communication patterns that we have is communication. Yeah, what kind of patterns do we have here? How do we respond? How do we handle things? How do we talk? How do we differentiate between being and doing? How do we throw everything in one pot? Do we have slight condescending, or do we have contempt in our communication, or are we open? Are we non-judgmental? These things need to be learned, yeah? How to speak from your heart, how to be authentic. These things are all part of our learning process. They're part of these pearls. Number 12 pillar for a healthy and strong relationship is conflict resolution. How do we deal with conflicts? How do we deal with disagreements, and confrontations? How can we turn a confrontation into a carefrontation, so that it ultimately strengthens our relationship? And then last but not least, and you may think that this is a non-brainer, but sometimes I've seen relationships that were pretty good in all these other pillars, but forgot one part, and that is that it's not just about arriving somewhere and then trying to maintain it and keep it the way it is. It's also about growing. It's also about growth. Growth needs to be there for both individual and the relationship together. And if the relationship with the partner prevents growth, yeah, that's something that can, bring a relationship to fall apart. Keep that in mind. So all these things together form what I call love integrity. Love integrity is something that Jeff and I teach as a course, and we're about to publish another course, a marriage course, which is just for partners to work through, that allow us to understand relationships in their full scope, in their full potential and capacity that they can provide for us here on our personal journey of healing, growing, and evolving. And if you are interested particularly in the energetic aspects of relationships, then I recommend the energy course, because there it's 18 systematic lessons in how to become not just more aware, but also how to work with these energetic interactions between people, these unseen interactions more consciously. We do this in the so-called energy course. All right, everyone. So this is the end here, the conclusion of mastering our relationships. So the bigger workshop series here in 2023 is adapting to change, and our next workshop is about mastering our goals. So we started out with mastering our relationships here in 23 because it is the main collective subject right now. Well, obviously not just romantic relationships, also the relationship with ourselves and others and neighbors and between nations and the collective at large. Next is becoming more aware of our goals and purpose here in life. And so we are moving toward, mastering our life here as we're going through these workshop series. This last year, our workshop series was called Karmic Manifestation. So if you're interested in karmic aspects of relationships and, how all this tends to play out in our lives and so forth, then go back to the recordings from last year, 13 parts. You find them all in the Sacred Self-Healing Forum, under the in the archive for the workshops. Also, when I sent out the recordings of each workshop, I usually have like the last 10 or so recordings on the right side of your email. If you're looking at it on your phone, you might not be able to see it, but if you look at it from your computer, you can see that there's YouTube links for all the previous workshops, at least the last year. Okay. Thank you so much, everyone. Yeah, as always, it was a pleasure. I hope that this workshop series here is helping you making more conscious choices, also seeing the purpose in some of these painful experiences in your life, and not just, deflecting it or projecting it, or getting stuck and seeing yourself as a victim. Remember that all these contaminations, all these pains, these adverse things in your life are hidden pearls. Each of those consciously worked with ends up turning into a pearl, transforming into a pearl. Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. I see all your thank yous here on my screen. The recording will be sent to you in your email. See you next month. Bye-bye.